Fourth inning. Racquetball. Negro League owners. Baseball really is an expensive thing to operate. Effa Manley, co-owner of the Newark Eagles. In October 1929, the U.S. stock market crashed and sent the country spiraling downward into what is known as the Great Depression. Businesses collapsed and banks closed, taking people's life savings with them. People were losing their jobs left and right, and soon it seemed everybody was out of work. What little money people had left could only be spent on food and heat. The Depression hit white baseball hard and Negro baseball even harder. The Eastern Colored League and the great Negro National League that Rube Foster had built fell apart after 12 seasons. Most teams disappeared. The teams that remained drifted around barnstorming wherever they could, passing the hat. At the same time, Rube Foster was committed to a mental institution. Running the league and trying to keep everything together all those years had taken their toll on him. The Eastern League owners started raiding his league for players, and it sent him over the edge. Not long after that, he passed away. It was terrible to see this happen to such a great man. He did what no one else could do, and now all that he had worked for was gone. Within a very short time, the economy failed, the Eastern Colored League folded, and both Rube and his great Negro National League were laid to rest. It looked like the grand old days of the Negro Leagues were over. Despite the hard times, there were a few who did make money during the Depression. They were known as numbers men, racketeers. Some were intelligent black men who could have been stockbrokers or general managers of great corporations, but because of segregation were not able to hold these positions. Instead, they found another way to make big money: the numbers game. Back then, it was a 100% illegal business. But nowadays, it's known as the lottery, and it's run by the government. These numbers men went around town taking people's penny bets on predicting some random number from the stock market pages in the paper, or something like that. If you guessed the right number, depending on the odds, you could make some good money. But some of those guys wouldn't pay up if your number hit big, so people didn't always bet with them. There was, however, one fella who always made good on his bets. His name was Gus Greenlee. He was the king of the numbers game in Pittsburgh. He owned a bar called the Crawford Grill, where all the big Negro stars performed, from singing legend Lena Horne to Bill Bojangles Robinson, the great dancer and entertainer. Greenlee wore expensive suits and drove around town in his Duesenberg, a fancy car that in those days was worth a fortune. He also had a few fighters. One was none other than the world light heavyweight champ, John Henry Lewis. And in 1930, he decided he was getting into the baseball business. It ended up being a great thing because that fella did a lot of good for Negro baseball. He picked up right where Rube left off. He reorganized the whole Negro National League and bought a team of his own, renaming it the Pittsburgh Crawfords. Across town, there was a team called the Homestead Grays. They were a strong ball club that had come up from the steelworker leagues, but by this time they were struggling because of the Depression. Like most folks, the owner, Cumberland Posey, needed money and was forced to sell off some of his best players. Gus Greenlee bought them all with a big smile and put together possibly one of the greatest teams in the history of baseball. It was a team of all-stars. Josh Gibson, the Black Babe Ruth, William Julius Judy Johnson, a star third baseman, Ted Page, an outstanding outfielder, Ted Double Duty Radcliffe, who used to pitch the top half of a doubleheader and catch the bottom half, and Jake Stevens. And to add to that, Satchel Paige, the most famous Negro League pitcher of all time, and James Cool Papa Bell, the fastest man in all of baseball. If that wasn't enough, he got the great Oscar Charleston to play with and manage them. It was a powerhouse. 5 of those guys wound up in the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. Man, that team was unbeatable. Well, they were unbeatable until Greenlee's numbers business got him into some trouble with the law. Someone on the inside of his operation had started to leak information to the police, and Gus ended up on the run. After that, his star players jumped the team to go play ball down in Santo Domingo. That was the end of the mighty Pittsburgh Crawfords. Baseball was an expensive business to operate. Many of the owners made their money in the numbers business and used it to support their baseball teams, like Abe and Effa Manley, who owned the Newark Eagles. You also had Alex Pompez, owner of the Cuban Stars and the New York Cubans, and Sonny Man Jackson, who had a stake in the Homestead Grays. But there were also doctors, a few black celebrities, and even a couple of undertakers. World-famous trumpeter Louis Armstrong had his Secret 9 ball club, and Bill Bojangles Robinson partly owned the New York Black Yankees. The world heavyweight boxing champ Joe Louis had a softball club, and Cab Calloway, the swing orchestra conductor, had his team of all-stars, and sometimes he even played too. We knew many of the black entertainers and celebrities personally. It really wasn't a thing to see Lena Horne or Count Basie in the same hotel where we were staying. We went to see their shows after a game, and sometimes we would have dinner with them. They were on the road as much as we were, and they had to stay in the same Negro hotels and rooming houses. Some folks called it the Chitlin Circuit. Most owners didn't make much money from their teams. Baseball was just a hobby for them, a way to make their illegal money look good. To save money, each team would only carry 15 or 16 players. The major league teams each carried about 25. Average salary for each player started at roughly $125 per month back in '34 and went up to $500 to $800 during the '40s, though there were some who made much more than that, like Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson. The average major league player's salary back then was about $1,200 per month. We also got around 50 cents to $1 per day for food allowance. Back then, you could get a decent meal for about 25 cents to 75 cents. Some of the owners didn't treat their players very well, didn't pay them enough or on time. That's why we would jump from team to team. Other owners would offer us more money, and we would leave our teams and go play for them. We were some of the first unrestricted free agents. There were, however, a few owners who did know how to treat their ball players. Come Posey was one of them. He always took care of his ball players, put them in the best hotels, and paid them well and on time. Buck Leonard said Posey never missed a payday in the 17 years he played for the Grays. Gus Greenlee built his team a ballpark, first ballpark ever built for a Negro team. After home games, his players would go to his restaurant to have dinner and meet the pretty girls who were already there waiting for him. Women have always loved ball players, you know. Gus also gave some of his ball players jobs during the off-season. He even bought a team bus and printed Pittsburgh Crawfords on the side. Abe and Effa Manley heard about it and bought one for their team, too. Effa was a sweetheart, a real smart lady, and not bad on the eyes either. She always made sure her players looked good, on and off the field. Had those boys looking sharp with their suits and hats. Shoes shine like mirrors. Her husband Abe was a nice fellow, too. He always traveled with the team. Not every owner did that. J.L. Wilkinson, who owned the Kansas City Monarchs, was one of the few white owners in Negro baseball. Like Rube Foster, he ran his team like it was a big league ball club. Did you know his team was the first to play night games in professional ball? In 1930, the Monarchs had the first portable lighting system in organized baseball. The major leagues didn't begin playing night games until 1935. Night baseball changed everything. All those folks who had to work during the day were now able to see a baseball game in the evening. While it was still light, the players set the lights up on poles around the field next to first and third base and in the outfield. They had these big dynamos hooked up to generators run by a 250 horsepower engine housed in a truck parked way in the outfield. Sometimes the lights would dim and we'd have to stop for a few minutes until the generators kicked back up again. They weren't really bright enough to play a baseball game, but we would play anyway. It was really hard to see the ball. If a fly ball was hit above the lights, you would have to pray it would find your glove, or else you just got out of the way. We also used to have trouble with outfielders running into the poles chasing fly balls. Some pitchers had the best games of their careers pitching night games. We put a long piece of white canvas along the center field fence so the batter could see the ball better coming over the plate. A lot of people would come out for those night games. Night baseball was good for the league. It meant another payday for everybody. But it also made our lives tougher because it meant we could play 3, even 4 games a day instead of 2. Satchel was right when he said, we were worked like the mule that plows the field during the week and pulls the carriage to church on Sunday morning. Fifth inning. The greatest baseball players in the world. Negro League All-Stars. The greatest untapped reservoir of raw material in the history of our game is the black race. Branch Rickey, owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers. If you ask most people what they know about the Negro Leagues, they probably won't be able to tell you much. They might name a few players like Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, or maybe Cool Papa Bell, but that's usually about it. These guys were excellent players for sure, but the Negro Leagues were much more than just a few ball players. Satchel, Josh, and Cool Papa were great athletes because they played against other great athletes. Satchel Paige was one of our finest pitchers, but we had other guys who threw just as hard and even harder. Josh Gibson was a powerful hitter, but we had other fellows who could hit just as far. The Negro Leagues were full of guys who were stars in their own right. Many of our guys could have rewritten the record books if they had been given the chance to play in the majors. We had a fellow named George Mule Suttles, who played for the Newark Eagles. He was a big one. We used to say he hit the ball like a mule kicks. Fans would yell, "Kick, Mule, kick!" He'd take a great big swing like Babe Ruth. He'd even thrill you when he struck out. Darn near screwed himself into the ground when he missed. But when he connected, he'd send it high and far. He killed curveballs. They would have to stop the game to measure how far they went. One of our best hitters was Norman Turkey Stearns. He was a quiet but peculiar fella who used to talk to his bats. Turkey said his nickname came from the pot belly he had as a child that made him look kind of like a little turkey. He had an odd batting stance and would choke up on the bat. But he sure could bust 'em. He had more home runs than anyone in the league. We had another fella, Judd Wilson. Mean fella. Real big upper body and little old legs. His knuckles were just about in the dirt. He scared the daylights out of pitchers. He crowded the plate and wouldn't back off. Just let the ball hit him so he could get on base. He could hit that long ball too. But he had a bad temper. Always got into fights. Used to bully everybody, even the umpires. If they made a call he didn't agree with, he would go after them. Chase those poor fellas all around the field. Oscar Charleston was one of the greatest ball players, black or white, in the history of the game. Certainly one of the best in his day. Many of the old-time white ball players who played against him would agree. He was like Hall of Famer Ty Cobb. He played hard and would do anything to win. He would run right over you if you were blocking the base, cut you with his spikes. And that fella was strong. Once he tore the steering wheel off a car. He could grab a baseball and loosen up the leather with his bare hands. He played center field and stood right behind second base. If the ball was hit over his head, he'd run back and get it, He'd just outrun the ball and could hit to all fields. Fans would chant, "Charlie, Charlie, Charlie," when he came to bat. Didn't matter where it was pitched, he'd get wood on it. No pitch was a bad pitch to him. Buck Leonard was the same way. Couldn't get a ball past him. Some called him the Black Garrick. He was one of our finest all-around players. Real clean fella. Didn't smoke or curse. He had a real nice swing. You could always count on him getting on base. He killed fastballs and was an excellent first baseman. Dick Say and Newt Allen were two of our best second basemen. And Pop Lloyd was one of the most superb all-time shortstops in the world. They nicknamed him the Black Wagner. In Cuba, they called him a cuchara, the shovel, 'cause he had big hands. He would scoop up grounders, dirt and everything, and zing 'em to first base. Willie Wells was an excellent shortstop, too. Both of those guys are in the Hall of Fame. Ray Dandridge was one of our top third basemen. He was real flashy, quite a showman. He would scoop up the ball and throw it all in one motion. We called him Squatty because he was so bow-legged. You could drive a train through his legs, but not a baseball. Judy Johnson was an outstanding third baseman, too. He would charge the ball. He wasn't as flashy as Dandridge, but he always got the job done and was a very smart fella. In the outfield, we had Ted Page, Jimmy Crutchfield, Turkey Stearns, and of course, Cool Papa Bell, who was the fastest man in all of baseball. He was like lightning. Cool Papa could circle the bases in 12 to 13 seconds. One minute, he was standing still on first base, and next thing you know, he was slowing up at third. More than once, he scored from first base on a bunt. He was so fast, Jesse Owens, the Olympic sprinter, wouldn't race him without his track shoes. And he was always in shape. Never had to worry about him getting tired. He could hit and had a good arm. Many folks don't know he used to be a pitcher, an old knuckleballer. He was a real quiet fellow, too. He wouldn't argue at all. That's why they called him Cool Papa, because he was so easygoing. Behind the plate, we had highly skilled catchers like Pepper Bassett, Josh Gibson, Quincy Troop, and Roy Campanella. But Raleigh Biz Mackey was possibly the greatest defensive catcher in Negro League history. Roy Campanella, the catcher who played with Jackie Robinson on the Brooklyn Dodgers, learned everything he knew about catching from Mackey. When you saw Campy's moves behind the plate, you were seeing Mackey. He was a great technician, handled pitchers with ease, and could throw to second base from a crouch. Couldn't fool around with him. Nobody would try to steal on Biz. He'd throw you out. He didn't drop many balls either, especially fly balls. He didn't even take off his mask to catch 'em. Solid hitter, too. On the mound, we had fireballers like Smokey Joe Williams, Willie Foster, Rube's younger brother, Andy Cooper, Hilton Smith, Verdell Mathis, Cannonball Dick Redding, Bullet Rogan, Leon Day, and many others. But the most famous of all pitchers was Leroy Satchel Paige. He got his nickname Satchel when he was a boy. He used to work at the train depot, carrying folks' bags and satchels. Satchel was a masterful pitcher, and by far the greatest showman. People came out by the thousands to see him pitch. If a team needed some cash, Wilkinson would send him out there to pitch a few innings for him. Satchel made a lot of money doing that. He pitched for more than 250 teams. That fellow was something else. We'd be waiting around for Satchel to show up for a game, and he was nowhere to be found. Then he'd arrive just a few minutes before game time with the police escort, sirens blazing and all. He always kept us laughing. He would walk real slow to the mound and let his long arms dangle. Satchel didn't believe in running. A few times he called in the outfield and struck out the side without giving up a single hit. He was tall and skinny. If he turned sideways, he'd disappear. His arms were just as skinny around his biceps as his wrists. We used to say they were like rubber hoses or long black snakes. Nowadays, pitchers pitch maybe once or twice a week and rest a few days in between. Not Satchel. He pitched every day. He lived on that mound. He said he kept his arm young by taking boiling hot showers. He would tie a big Turkish towel around his arm and let the hot water run over it. Nowadays, pitchers use ice for their arms, but back then they used heat. He also rubbed his arm with this real hot snake oil that some American Indian fella gave him. He wouldn't give up that secret formula for anything. When Satchel pitched, he raised his big foot up high, let it come down, and then whipped the ball by you. Satchel was nothing but fastball. Even his slow stuff was fast. We knew what was coming, but we still couldn't hit it. The ball would be moving so fast, it looked like a little white pill by the time it got to the plate. And it would jump just a little bit before it got to you, just enough to make you miss it. Satchel wasn't legendary only for his speed, but also for his control. He could put the ball wherever he wanted to put it. Most pitchers warmed up by throwing over home plate or a glove, but Satchel used a candy wrapper or a bottle cap. A catcher only had to hold up his glove, and Satchel would hit it. Satchel liked to drive fast, too. Drove like a demon. He'd get stopped for speeding in some small towns on his way to a game. Once, he got stopped, and the judge fined him $25. Satchel took out a wad of cash and started peeling off $10 bills. Told the judge, "Here's 50. I'm coming back through tomorrow." Yeah, that Satch was something else. One of Satchel's rivals at the plate was Josh Gibson. Josh was hitting that ball out of ballparks everywhere. He hit more home runs than anybody except Turkey Stearns. Some say Josh hit the ball out of Yankee Stadium. Not even Babe Ruth did that. He had the most beautiful, natural swing. His body was built for hitting. Slender waist, big, muscular back. He would roll his sleeves up so the pitcher could see his powerful arms. He stood flat-footed and would just mash the ball. The ball would shoot straight toward the outfield and still be on its way up as it cleared the fence. It would land about 400 or 500 feet away. If an infielder had tried to catch it before it took off, the ball would have probably taken him with it. Josh hit everything. Fastballs, curved balls. Couldn't fool him. Pitchers would just have to pitch and pray. He was so good, people started calling him Mr. Black Baseball. Some even called him the Black Babe Ruth. But others say that the Babe should have been called the White Josh Gibson. Josh was a real jolly fella. We used to say he was like a big kid, and great behind the plate, too. When he started out, he wasn't as good a catcher as he was a hitter, but he wanted to become a complete player. So he really worked hard on developing his arm and, most of all, his accuracy. He became one of the better defensive players. He could pick you off at second from a crouch. The man was awesome. But you know something? We had many Josh Gibsons in the Negro Leagues. We had many Satchel Pages. But you never heard about them. It's a shame the world didn't get to see them play. The Negro Leagues were home to some of the greatest baseball players that ever lived. Guys like Stuart Slim Jones, John Beckwith, Dick Lundy, and Oliver Marcel. Newt Allen, Dobie Moore, Jimmy Crutchfield, Pepper Bassett, Dan and Sam Bankhead, Buck O'Neill, Bingo DeMoss, Joe Black, Roy Partlow, Ted Page, Alex and Ted Double Duty Radcliffe, Chet Brewer, Quincy Troop, Andy Pullman Porter, Piper Davis, Walter McCoy, Mule Miles, Wild Bill Wright. There were just so many. Can't even name them all. Unfortunately, most of them will never receive the recognition they deserve. We can only hope the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown will someday open the doors to more of these fellas. Sixth inning. Latin America. Baseball in paradise. The crowds were big and the fans red hot. Schoolboy Johnny Taylor, pitcher, New York Cubans. Many ball players in the Negro Leagues came from Latin America. Baseball was real popular down there in Cuba, Mexico, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and Venezuela. It was so warm, they could play baseball all year long, and they did. Those fellas became quite good, and some had strong teams. Quite a few of those boys could have made a fortune if they had played in the majors. Martin Dihigo was one of them. Baseball came to him just as natural and easy as breathing. He could play every position, even pitch, had natural grace like Joe DiMaggio. He was really something to watch. Jose Mendez was a great pitcher and played all positions too. Another fella, Cristobal Torriente, he was known as the Black Christy Mathewson. They say he could hit the ball over a mountain. If he had been a couple shades lighter, he could have played in the majors. Major league owners would take a Cuban before they would take a Negro. Guess they didn't know slave ships stopped down in those islands too. Some of the Latin ball players didn't want to play in the United States anyway. They didn't want to leave their home, and who could blame them? It was nice down there. It was always warm, and those Latin women sure were pleasing to the eye. And they loved Americans. Down there, Negroes were treated just the same as anyone else, the way we were supposed to be treated. There was no such thing as segregation. We could stay at any hotel and eat at any restaurant. And if you were a ball player, a good ball player, they treated you like a king. Kids followed us in the streets asking for autographs. Our pictures would be in the newspaper. The Latin ball club owners paid for our plane tickets, both ways, and put us up in hotels for the whole winter. We could even bring our families if we wanted to. Didn't have to pay for a thing. And we traveled to games by train, not on those old, bouncy, rickety buses. We only had to play about 3, maybe 4 games a week, mostly on the weekends. That was heaven compared to the Negro Leagues. The rest of the time, we would go fishing, go to a cantina, or hang out in those plazas, do some girl watching. In Mexico, we would even go to bullfights. The Latin leagues paid well, too, much more than the Negro Leagues. You could fill up a whole trunk full of those pesos. That's why a lot of guys would jump the Negro League teams to go play down there. It drove the Negro League owners crazy. Satchel Paige almost broke up the whole Negro League when he took a bunch of stars down there to play. Wiped out poor Gus Greenlee's Crawfords. The Negro Leagues banned Satch after that. Well, for a little while anyway. But in Latin America, you had to produce. If you didn't play well, they put you right back on the plane and sent you home. 2, maybe 3 bad games, and you were out of there. They were serious about their baseball. Fans were crazy, too. Never seen fans get so excited about a baseball game. Go to town after a bad game, and they wouldn't speak to you. They'd just look at you mean. And man, they went wild if you hit a home run. In Cuba, they would give you beer or money if you hit one. They give you a car in Puerto Rico if you hit 25 of them. That's right, a car, a Hudson. But it was hard to hit home runs in some of those parks. They were huge. Many long balls that should have been home runs were caught. And if you were a pitcher, you couldn't throw at batters like we used to. Hit one of their batters, and they'd throw you in jail. And boy, was it hot down there. You could see the heat coming off the ground. Had to keep moving in the outfield because the heat would burn up through the bottoms of your shoes. Some guys passed out in the field, even in the dugout. It was so hot that the first game of a doubleheader would be in the morning, and the second game wouldn't be till late afternoon when it was cooler. The food was even hotter. If you didn't ask them to take it easy on the spices, they would load that food up and it would burn right through you. Satchel Paige blamed his stomach miseries on all that hot food that he ate while he was down there. The truth was, it was his rotten teeth. We had some great games playing against those Latin fellas. We were all good friends. We would hang out and play cards after the game or go fishing together. We had a good time. But as soon as we put on those uniforms and walked onto the field, we didn't know each other. They'd spike you like you were a stranger. One time, Ted Page was playing in Cuba. He was fooled on a pitch he thought was a curveball and was hit in the head with the ball. Knocked him out cold. When Page came to, he looked up at the pitcher, and instead of asking him if he was okay, that pitcher said, "You're not hit that one too good." You didn't get any sympathy from them. We were the same way. It was a lot of fun playing down there, but sometimes it would get lonely. They treated us nice, and it was really beautiful, but after a while we'd get a little homesick. There was always a language barrier, and their cultures were so different from ours. Playing in Latin America was a great way to spend the winter, but ask anybody, it is tough going without a plate of greens, sweet candied yams, and some buttermilk biscuits for 4 months. We knew when it was time to go home. Seventh inning. Good exhibition. The Negro Leagues versus the White Leagues. When we played head to head, it was nip and tuck. They won some, and we won some. Gene Benson, outfielder for the Philadelphia Stars. Our season started in the spring and ended in September. We played more than 100 games a season and then played winter ball in Cuba or Mexico. In between, we traveled all over the country playing all kinds of teams, black, white, Latin, pro, and semi-pro. Some Negro Leaguers even barnstormed in Canada and Asia, but most games were played in the United States. In many places, we wouldn't see a black face for miles around. The home team would supply the umpires, usually the town sheriff or somebody like that. The winner would get 60% of the gate, and the loser 40. If we tied, we'd split it even down the middle. They did their best to keep us from winning, sometimes dragging the game out until it was too dark to play to force a tie. We had more ties than anything. We could have beaten most of those teams with our hands behind our backs, but we would get robbed. The umpires would call us out when we were safe, and everything was a strike, no matter where it was pitched. You'd have thought all of their pitchers were named Satchel Paige. We had to learn to hit bad pitches. The Brooklyn Bushwicks used to freeze the balls before the game, took the life out of them. When we hit them, they wouldn't go very far. Sometimes we would get them, too. There was a catcher, Chappie Gray, who used to catch Satchel when he was in his prime. One time, they were playing in Enid, Oklahoma. By the time the game got up into late innings, it started to get kind of dark. So Chappie told Satchel, "Hey, Satchel, you got 2 strikes on this hitter. Man, you throwing the ball so hard, I can't see it too well, and I don't want to break my finger. I'll tell you what you do. You wind up like you're going to throw the ball, and I'll hit my fist in my mitt, make it sound like it's the ball. Man, nobody will know the difference." He told Satchel, "You don't want to hit one of these white guys, man, or we're going to have to leave here running. They'll hang us down here." Satchel said, "Okay, I'll do that." So he went back out there, and he wound up and came down with that long stride, big follow-through. Chappie hit his fist in his mitt, and the umpire yelled, "Strike 3!" That hitter was so mad he threw his bat down. He yelled at the umpire, "You blind, Tom? Anybody who could see knows that ball was high and outside." Those little white towns in the South were rough. The fans would call you everything. One lady brought us a black cake, had it delivered by a man in a white coat, written with icing. From the top corner to the bottom corner at an angle was spelled N-I-G, etc. Now, why would somebody go through the trouble to do something like that? I guess you could call that dedication. Kids in those towns didn't know any better. They'd call you the N-word before they'd say colored people, because it was easier. And we couldn't talk back, fight back, or even run the score up too high. They might chase us out of there, and we wouldn't get paid. It wasn't big money, but we needed it. You couldn't change those folks' minds anyhow. We were just a bunch of ball players. They were long set in their ways. There were white teams who traveled just as much as we did. Life on the road was rough, but wasn't as bad for them because they could stay where they played and didn't have trouble finding a meal. House of David was one of those teams. We played them quite often. They were a good ball team. They were from a religious colony out in Benton Harbor, Michigan. Wore long hair and beards. The major leagues frowned on facial hair back then. There were a couple of knockoff House of David teams, too. Sometimes they would hire major leaguers to play for them in the off-season. They would wear false beards when they played, but they weren't fooling anybody. Even old Satch pitched a few innings for the colored House of David. We played major leaguers quite often. When their season ended in October, they would barnstorm against us out in California and sometimes in Cuba. We played everybody from Ty Cobb to Babe Ruth. We won about 60% of the time. We hit them just the same as we hit our own pitches, and they had just as much trouble hitting Satchel as we did. That's how we knew we were good enough to play in the major leagues. There was never any problem on the field. We were friends with those guys. If there was a guy who didn't want to be bothered with us, then he just wouldn't play. The guys on the other team would come over after the game and tell us how good we were. Man, if we had a nickel every time we heard, if you were white, you'd be worth such and such. We'd all be rich men. They knew we were just as good as they were. They respected us, and we respected them. A ball player is a ball player, and good ball players are always up for a good game, and we can give it to them. Besides, they made some good money playing against us. Back then, major leaguers didn't make all the money that they make today. In the off-season, they had to find a way to make a living. We had a good thing going, playing the major leaguers in the off-season, until Stan Musial, the St. Louis Cardinal slugger, put an end to it unintentionally. He was supposed to play with the Cleveland Indians pitching great Bob Feller on an all-star barnstorming team out in California. Only Musial started late because the Cardinals were in the World Series. That year, the series went 7 games, and by the time Musial made it out to California, the Pacific Coast League had already started up. By the end of the season, he realized how much money he could have made had he been there the whole time, much more than he made in the World Series. He told people about it when he got home, and when Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, the commissioner of Major League Baseball, who was dead set against integration, caught wind of it, he made a rule that banned all major leaguers from barnstorming until the World Series was over. That Landis tried everything to stop those major leaguers from playing us. We were winning too many games, and he broke the whole thing up. Said something about the major league getting a black eye when we beat them. He cut back the number of games they could play us and told them they couldn't wear their major league team uniforms. They had to call themselves All-Stars and play down our games as mere exhibitions. Satchel Paige put together an all-star team and played major league pitchers Bob Feller's and J. Hannah Dizzy Dean's all-star teams. When people heard that Satchel Paige was going to be pitching against Dizzy Dean or Bob Feller, they would come, like we used to say, two to a mule. One year, Diz and Satch filled Yankee Stadium for one of those exhibition games. They charged full price and made a killing. Sometimes Satchel was throwing so hard, he wouldn't let their batters even touch the ball with the bat. And Feller and Dean, those boys could bring it too. As far as competition, I'd have to say we were about even. Only thing different was that they were a little more polished than we were, and those major league teams had deeper benches than we did. Negro League teams would only carry about 15 to 19 players at most, with about 6 pitchers, 2 good and the rest mediocre, and 1 good catcher. The majors would carry about 25 players, 6 or 7 good pitchers, and 2 good catchers. If we got hurt, well then, we just had to play hurt, because there wasn't anyone to come in for us. We used to say we were paid for 9 innings So we played for 9. But even with all that, we still won baseball games. I guess we beat those major leaguers as often as we did because we could outthink them. Baseball is a game of intelligence. For a long time, a lot of people thought Negroes could never play Major League Ball because they thought we weren't smart enough. It took them a long time to realize that nothing was further from the truth. Those major leaguers learned a lot by playing us, and we learned a lot by playing them. They learned we were men, just as they were, and they would shake our hands and look us in the eye after we beat them, as did we. Maybe we did help change a few minds by playing baseball. After all, 8th inning, wartime heroes, World War II, and the Negro League All-Star Game. If you were anybody, you were at the East-West game. Buck O'Neil. 8th inning, wartime heroes, World War II, and the Negro League All-Star Game. If you were anybody, you were at the East-West game. Buck O'Neil. When the United States entered the Second World War in 1941, many of the Negro League teams lost players to the draft. Some of the ball players who went into the military played baseball in the service. And after the war, some players from military baseball teams, like Bullet Rogan and Jackie Robinson, went on to play in the Negro Leagues. Like everything else back then, the military was segregated. The companies, the barracks, the commissary, and baseball. If a ball player was good enough, he might not have to see a day of combat. He could play baseball for the military and the special services, which was a group of teams that went around entertaining the troops playing baseball exhibition games. Boxing champ Joe Louis was in the special services too, except he boxed exhibition matches. But you know something? A lot of Negroes wouldn't see any action anyway. The Army was funny about Negroes in the service. They wouldn't send Negroes to fight Germans during the war. They'd send white soldiers to fight before they would send any of us. If Negroes did go, they were only allowed to do work like cooking and cleaning or unloading and bringing the white troops ammunition, which might not seem like much, but could really be quite dangerous. Imagine unloading ammunition from a ship and accidentally dropping it on a ship full of ammunition. They had to be very careful. Isn't that something? We really wanted to fight for our country. A few guys saw combat and did well, but most didn't. Truth is, the military probably did us a favor. If all we had to do in the service was play baseball or do something that kept us from going into combat, it was okay because it meant we would see our loved ones again. Toward the end of the war, when players started to come back, crowds got bigger and bigger. Black folks would come by the thousands for a Negro League baseball game. Before and after the game, there would be lively music and food, and in bigger cities, they would have beauty or swimsuit contests or ladies' night. And on opening day, the ballparks would be filled to the gills. A black entertainer or the mayor would throw out the first pitch. Many times, Negro League teams would outdraw the local Major League teams. The Homestead Grays would have 30,000 people in the stands for a Sunday game, when the Washington Senators had only 25,000. Although several of our teams lost players to the draft, Negro baseball was still good business, and with the help of night baseball, the leagues thrived during World War II. Players' salaries grew, and the Saturday Evening Post even did a big story on Satchel Paige. After that, anywhere he pitched, there was a huge crowd. He'd only have to pitch a few innings, and then someone else, usually Hilton Smith, a great pitcher in his own right, would finish the game. The biggest crowds could be found every August in Chicago's Comiskey Park at the East-West Classic, the Negro League's All-Star Game. It was founded by Pittsburgh Crawfords owner Gus Greenlee in 1933, the same year the Major League had their first All-Star Game. Managers and owners elected players for the all-star teams, and fans voted for them in the black newspapers. The Pittsburgh Courier, the Kansas City Call, the Baltimore Afro-American, and the Chicago Defender. There was nothing more glorious than the East-West game. People came from as far as Louisiana and Mississippi and Tennessee to see it. The railroad had to add extra cars to the trains just to make room for all of those folks traveling to the game. A couple of times, we had more than 50,000 people crammed into that ballpark. We had to turn people away. The East-West game would even outdraw the Major League All-Star game. Look in the crowd, and there in the front row was Bill Bojangles Robinson, Joe and Marva Lewis, Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, or Lena Horne. It became more than just a game. It was a high-class affair. People who didn't know anything about baseball came to the ballpark in their Sunday best just to be seen at the East-West game. You hear? Black and white. We had some great games, too. The score was usually close. Can you imagine Satchel Paige, Chet Brewer, Buck Leonard, Josh Gibson, Cool Papa Bell, and Mule Suttles all on the same team? The best in Negro baseball. All of them down there ready to give the people a show. If the owners didn't do well during the season, they could make it up at the East-West game. The players only got about $50 each, and the rest, after expenses, went to the owners' pockets. They made out like bandits. Satch and Josh later negotiated their own fee, and soon the players banded together and demanded more money. And they got it. And I'll tell you something. It wasn't until the Major League owners saw all of those fans at the East-West game that they started thinking a little more seriously about integrating baseball. The almighty dollar has a way of changing folks' minds. Ninth inning. Then came Jackie Robinson. There was never a man in the game who could put mind and muscle together quicker and with better judgment than Jackie Robinson. Branch Rickey. There is a story the pitcher Chet Brewer used to tell. A black boy went into the ballpark and he told a white manager, "Hey, I'd like to try out for your team." The white manager said, "Go away, boy. I don't have any room for a black boy on my team." He went away and came back the next night and asked the manager again. The manager said, "I told you last night I don't have any room for a black boy on my team." So he came back a third night, and the manager said, "I've had it up to here with you. If you come back tomorrow night, I'll have the police throw you in jail." So the following night, the kid bought a ticket right over this white man's dugout. And he sat there, and he bugged this manager, and he bugged him, and he bugged him. So finally the manager said, "Hey, coach, get that man down here and give him a uniform. I'm going to pick out a spot in this game to embarrass him so he won't ever come back. Because I know he can't play. He's just a lot of mouth." So we brought him down and put him in a uniform. And this particular night, they were playing a team that had the ace relief pitcher in the whole league, a big giant of a white man who threw BBs. The opposing pitcher walked the bases full, and the manager said, "This is where I'll show this black boy up." He said, "Hey, you pinch hit." So the kid ran by the bat stand, picked up the first bat he came to, and walked up to the plate. The opposing manager summoned his big relief ace pitcher from the bullpen. And the first pitch this big white man threw, this black boy hit it up against the right center field fence. And as he was rounding second base, the white manager jumped up and said, "Look at that Cuban go!" Major League owners had been looking at our Negro League players for years. It's no secret that some of them wanted to sign Negroes to their teams. They would try to pass them off as Cuban or American Indian. John McGraw, the manager of the Baltimore Orioles back in 1901, signed a Negro named Charlie Grant to his team. Now, everybody and his mother knew that Charlie was a Negro, but McGraw tried to pass him off as a Cherokee Indian named Chief Charlie Tokahama. It almost worked, too. until a bunch of Negroes went to congratulate him after a game and ruined the whole thing. Toward the end of World War II, major league owners began sending their scouts to Negro League games. They even gave some of our guys tryouts, but nothing ever came of it. Even the last place teams wouldn't take us. They always had some excuse like, there are just too many of you to go in, or nobody wants to be the first one to sign a Negro. We knew that if they decided to sign one of us, it meant we'd be taking the place of one of the white ball players, and he'd be out of a job. That didn't sit too well with the major leaguers. It seemed like the major league owners would never sign a Negro ball player. Kennesaw Mountain Landis made a statement in the papers saying there was no agreement of any sort that banned Negroes from playing in the majors. But how else do you explain the absence of Negroes from Major League Baseball for almost 60 years? That statement was a flat-out lie. Landis wouldn't have let a Negro into the major leagues if his life depended on it, and that's the truth. Bill Veeck tried to buy the Philadelphia Phillies and planned to load the team up with Negro League stars like Josh Gibson, Cool Papa Bell, and Satchel Paige. He told Landis what he wanted to do, but of course, Landis shot it down. The team was sold to somebody else for next to nothing. After nearly 25 long years as Major League Baseball commissioner, Judge Landis died in 1944. A new commissioner was elected, A.B. Happy Chandler. A couple of reporters from the black papers immediately asked him where he stood on the question of integrating baseball. That fella came right out and said, if a colored boy can make it on Okinawa and Guadalcanal, he can make it in baseball. We had waited more than 50 years to hear those words. It was all over the papers. People, black and white, were talking about it at the dinner table, in the street, in the barber shops, on the radio, in the newspapers, everywhere. A lot of the major league owners didn't like what Chandler said, especially coming from a Southern fella. That really got him into some trouble. They couldn't wait for him to make a mistake. As soon as he stubbed his toe, Chandler was out of there. He only lasted a few years as commissioner, but he made it possible for Negroes to play in Major League Baseball. People always talk about Branch Rickey integrating baseball, and he deserves a great deal of credit because he was the only Major League owner willing to take a chance on a Negro ball player. But if it hadn't been for Chandler, Rickey couldn't have done a thing. After the door to the major leagues had finally opened, the only question was, who will be the first to go? By that time, many of our great Negro League players were past their prime. Buck Leonard was about 38, 39 years old. Ray Dandridge was up there too, and so was Josh Gibson, and he was sick. Satchel and Cool Papa were even older, and if they had been called up, they wouldn't have gone straight to the majors. They would have had to play in the minors for a year or two. On top of that, they would have had to take a pay cut. Most guys were making about $800 a month in the Negro League, and that was good money. Starting salary in the minors was about half that. The owners were looking for somebody young. We had a few young ball players who were good enough to choose from. Larry Doby, Monty Irvin, Roy Campanella, Jackie Robinson, and a few others. We thought Monty would have been the first to go, or maybe Larry Doby, but they chose Jackie Robinson. Why Jackie? Now, Jackie was a good ball player, but we had guys we thought were better. A lot of the guys weren't happy that Jackie was chosen to be first. But you know something? You can be wrong about a person. We'll look back and see that they found the right man in Jackie. All of that stuff he took, nobody else would have taken. At most games, white fans hissed at him and spat at him, and once even threw a black cat on the field. I remember a bunch of the guys sitting around talking about Jackie and the stuff those white folks were doing to him while he was with the Montreal Royals. Josh Gibson said, "Man, if they did that to me, I would have punched them in the mouth." And everybody said, "See, that's why you didn't go." Jackie was a big guy, about 6 feet, 205 pounds. He had a college education, and had played with whites while he was in school. And he was fast. He had been a track star out in California before he went into the military. So was his brother, Mac, who placed second behind Jesse Owens in the 200-meter dash in Germany. Jackie had played football and basketball too. On the Kansas City Monarchs, he played shortstop and second base, and during his year with the team, he hit .345 with 10 doubles, 4 triples, and 5 home runs. Jackie hated to lose. He wouldn't take anything from anybody. I tell you, Jackie had a terrific temper and could curse like a sailor. If he felt someone was doing him wrong, he would let them know about it. Jackie got into about 3 fights that year he was with the Monarchs. One was with an umpire. Knocked him out cold, but the players tried to keep that one quiet. It was his temper that got him out of the service early. The military was segregated back then, and it drove him crazy. Those guys would yell at Jackie, calling him this and that. That kind of thing was hard for a man like Jackie to take. He knew he was smarter than a lot of those guys and got himself into trouble talking back. Once, while he was riding a military bus, the driver told him to sit in the back where Negroes were supposed to sit. Jackie knew that on a military bus he could sit wherever he wanted, so he refused. Although the Army officers knew he was right, Jackie was court-martialed. He beat the charges, but was later honorably discharged from the military. But Jackie was a good man despite his temper. He didn't drink or smoke and wouldn't go out on the town chasing girls like most of the other fellas. He just stayed at the hotel and played cards. His heart belonged to one gal. He was so serious. We used to kid him about how serious he was. He always talked about playing in the majors. Maybe deep down, he knew he'd be the first to go. Even still, he was very nervous about being able to make it in the big leagues. His roommate on a barnstorming team in Venezuela, Gene Benson, said, "Where you're going ain't half as tough as where you been." He told Jackie about how we had played major leaguers for years and beat them just the same as we had beaten our own teams, even though the playing conditions were so much tougher. Hearing that really helped Jackie. Before Jackie signed with the major league team, the Brooklyn Dodgers, the team owner, Branch Rickey, wanted to meet Jackie face to face. During the meeting, Mr. Rickey acted as if he was angry, yelling and calling Jackie every racial epithet in the book, just to test Jackie's famous temper. Jackie kept his cool and just sat there. He was probably wondering why this old white man called him all of these things when they were just supposed to be having a meeting. Mr. Rickey explained that he was only testing him and that this was the sort of thing he would have to face every day on the road, and that he would have to hold his temper and not talk back no matter what for a period of 3 years. He asked Jackie if this was something that he could do. Most guys would have said, "Oh yes, Mr. Rickey, I can do that." But Jackie thought for a moment. Then he looked Mr. Rickey in the eye and said, "If you are willing to take this risk and allow me to join your ball club, I can assure you that there will be no incident." This really impressed Mr. Rickey, and it only shows just how smart and eloquent Jackie was. Jackie signed with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1945. He played his first year with Montreal, the Dodgers farm team, and led the team to the minor league World Series. In the spring of 1947, Jackie was called up to the Dodgers and did well there, too. He hit .297 and led his team with 29 stolen bases and 125 runs scored. He also had 12 home runs. The Dodgers won the pennant in 1947, and the Sporting News named Jackie Rookie of the Year. But the most amazing thing of all was that he did it under all that pressure. He received death threats, and someone even threatened to kidnap his little boy. On the field, the fans called him names and threw stuff at him. Pitchers threw at him, and players pushed him around and tried to spike him when they ran the bases. He had to deal with that kind of thing every single day. And the worst part was that he couldn't fight back. He didn't say anything. because he knew it would ruin the chances of any other Negro playing in the majors. I think that is what hurt Jackie the most. He was the type of guy who always stood up for himself, and he just couldn't do that in the majors, at least for the first 3 years. He had to keep it all inside. That kind of thing can make you sick. That's why he died so young. Baseball is what killed Jackie, nothing else. But Jackie did something that made us all proud. He brought our Negro League style of play to the major leagues and changed the face of baseball. He made it quicker and more daring. His base running changed the way pitchers had to pitch. And most important, Jackie cleared the way for the rest of us to play in the majors. And in doing that, he helped bring the rest of the country closer to accepting Negroes as first-class citizens.